Should go. See the red button?
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And the red thing is flashing.
So she's
Good.
Okay.
pretty much stops.
Thank you. That's cool. We'll take care of it.
Oh my God. What's going on?
We'll screw it up.
And of course, it turns out we're in row C. So, and she's down there the whole time. She looks at me and she goes,
Very successful. The only industry that Trump is really pushing that problem. I mean, what does he have to say about it? And what does he have to say?
Okay, we know who's staying home for Thanksgiving. You guys. My brother Stanley, who's the usual videographer, he's already in Tennessee, or on his way to Tennessee this morning. So in his place, we have Robert Sturdivant returning from the hospital. Thank you very much. Straight out of the hospital to video our program this morning. Thank you, Robert.
Mental hospital.
Robert, do you want to talk about your coalition and you have this new thing that you're doing? Tell us about that.
All right.
Here's the
there we are.
microphone.
Glad to be back. Thank you for all the Facebook posts. That was very nice. I'm the coalition coordinator for the Cincinnati Educational Justice Coalition, and we're going to have we'll have a big meeting in December, the second Thursday, at the Fire Museum, where we'll try to set our agenda. But the big news is that I've been named contributing editor for a collection of personal narratives, how people became politically involved and went from thought to action. The deadline for submission will be January 31st. I believe there's an 1,800 word limit.
How many pages is that?
It's about 4 pages in a 3x5, I believe. So we're gonna try to get as many contributions as we can from people like you, and we're gonna publish that in the new year, and that'll be our second book discussion. That we'll have a couple discussions around that, how people became politically involved, and I'm sure that there are many people here who would fit that bill.
Lynn, our speaker today is going to be Lynn, and she's going to tell us about how that.
Lynn's got a great story about that, I'm sure. Now, I'll screw
I
up.
can give my story too.
Well, that's right. But anybody who wants to submit, it'll be January 31st. You'll hear it every Tuesday from now until that date. And we'll try to get as many people to contribute as possible.
Can we submit it to you digitally? Would that be better?
Yes, there are.
Anyone with a notice, take a card, one of the newsletter next time.
Okay, that brings us to Peter.
Mr. Rose will take care of you. Write it out if you want to have your.
Also, Richard.
Give the microphone to Peter.
I can't hear you.
How will your booklet or book be issued? I mean,
It'll be published by a local publishing company called Aurora Press, and everyone who submits will get a free copy, and then we'll try to sell them to the public at large, and I'll try to hawk them here for the next 45 Tuesdays.
will this be people from any party?
Any party, we will consider all submissions. Totally open.
Where do the proceeds go?
What we'll try to do there is we'll try to break even. That will try. There won't be any. If something were to really happen and it did well, we would pay the authors. There's a possibility that we may try to publish as a maybe like a senior seminar book for a high school class, and if that were to happen, you know, the lawyers will get involved. But the books will totally be open, and it'll be very, very transparent. So
Okay.
I hope you would consider that.
Microphone to Peter. Peter's going to tell you about the newsletter.
Am I? Oh. Actually, Richard Asimus, who was here last week, sent me a page of things we can do to participate in trying to get the redistricting change, get rid of gerrymandering. So I ran off 25 of these. I'll pass them around.
Pass them
Anyone
out.
else who has a notice they'd like in the newsletter, please give me a card. Also, one of the weird things in the trying to deal with the addresses is that Google refused about 4 or 5 addresses. It wouldn't even forward the newsletter until I got rid of them, but a couple of them I just put in my Miami email and they went right through, so I don't really know. So if you didn't get the newsletter, give me your email again and I'll set up the second account, a Miami one. They have a maximum of 20, but I hope it won't be that many. Anyway, I'll pass these.
And if you have not given your email to Peter, make sure Peter gets your email so that you can get the newsletter in the future.
Hi, Chris Berry, just wanted to invite everybody to come over and join the Queen City Balladeers at their
They're good. Oh, they're so
Leo
good.
Coffee House every Sunday from 7 to 9 at Zion United Church of Christ in Norwood. It's on the corner of, I think, Montgomery and
Every
Indian
Sunday?
Mound. Every Sunday, except for Super Bowl Sunday, during the school year. And if you play an instrument, come on over at 5:30 and join the song circle.
They were so good. They did a presentation for us on political songs earlier this year. They were so good. Okay. I have to make, here's John Raypatch.
Well, it's nice to be back. We've been gone, having fun. So this is just this has nothing to do with Democrats or politics, but since I've been doing this for a couple of weeks, our Kiwanis Club, you know, all the money that we raise goes to our school kids, you know, so it goes to school children projects. So I'm just letting you know that we still have fruits and nuts available if you're interested in that. For they're fantastic. This is the best quality and prices are competitive. Then the other item we do every year, and this is our 43rd year, is grapefruit and oranges, citrus, which comes from right from the grower. It's nothing better in the world. And the pickup, so I know a lot of you won't be interested in this because the pickup place, although I could bring them here to this location, the pickup place is in Forest Park. So I just want to let it, you know, and I'll have these on my table up there, but the citrus is out of sight, man, and the prices are the same as Kroger's, but you have to buy a 20-pound box at least. So
Those oranges are spectacular though.
About 20 oranges, you know. You can share, you know, with your friends. This make it a Democratic friend.
I just want to mention a wonderful book,
Martha.
a wonderful progressive book you might want to know about. Becoming Mrs. Burton is by a woman who was in and out of prison for 16 years because of her drug habits. And finally she ran into a reporter that could help her tell her whole story. Everything that happened to her during those prison terms. And then when she got out, she started a safe house for other women coming out of prison because they get off the bus with $100 and they don't know where to go, what to do. And so she meets them at the bus stops and all. She now has 5 such homes. But this relates to us in Ohio because the book, The New Jim Crow, most of you probably know about that book, by the attorney, black attorney at Ohio State, what's her last name? Michelle? Alexander. That's a marvelous book. But you can Google Becoming Ms. Burton, this book I'm speaking of, that Michelle helped get it published. And so she and the author, Susan Burton, are on a 1-hour C-SPAN show of a week or so ago, I believe it was. And you can Google that, just Google Becoming Ms. Burton, and you will see in, you know, all the links on Google, a whole hour took place at the Abyssinian Baptist Church in New York with Michelle and this author, and it's a marvelous show.
Thank you, Martha. Anyone else?
Other announcements? I have an announcement. I have an announcement, not today, not tomorrow, but actual Thanksgiving is Katie Hoffman's birthday.
Hey,
Katie with the red shirt and the name that says Katie there.
all
And we
right.
have a cake over there, and if you haven't seen the cake, you need to walk by the cake and just admire the cake. I love Costco. And this is the first time I brought in a chocolate cake. And I know the last white cakes. They seem to disappear anyway, but because they're awfully good cakes. But we're now going to sing Happy Birthday to Katie. Are you ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Katie. Happy birthday to you. And many more.
Thank you all very much. I don't know how I got to be this old, but.
I'll tell you, it's not even.
She is our speaker person, so if you have an idea for a speaker, you need to see Katie. Katie is the one who does all of the diligence, the due diligence in terms of asking them, following up, getting them to, warning them that it's coming up, thanking them afterwards. There you go. So Katie does the real hard legwork of this organization, so thank you very much, Katie. Okay. And today's topic is childhood poverty in Cincinnati, and we're going to hear from our speaker, Lynn Marmer. She is an independent. She is a homegrown girl. She went to Walnut Hills,
Here we go.
University of Cincinnati Grad School, and University of Cincinnati Law School. And here she is talking about how we can help contribute towards childhood poverty in Cincinnati. Here we go, Lynn Marmer.
All right, Lynn.
Well, I had to laugh because I grew up right up the street, so, the Blue Gibbon is kind of like home territory, but it's nice to see many familiar faces. And thank you for inviting me. Not many people want to sit and talk about childhood poverty while they're eating lunch, so I appreciate that. But it is, in fact, an incredible issue in our community, and one that really doesn't reflect our community at all. I mean, we think of our community as being caring and generous, and we are. And we think of our community as being forward-thinking, and I think it's shocking when we realize that we have the 6th largest child poverty rate in the nation. That's not of cities our size, that's of all cities. So that also compares us to places like Chicago and Los Angeles and Houston and so on. And a lot of people always ask, and I know that this is an interactive and a very smart audience, so I'm going to try and answer the questions as I go, but I also encourage you to just pop up. First is Detroit, with 57% of their population of children live in poverty. Next is Cleveland, then Memphis, then Toledo, then St. Louis, and Cincinnati. And Cincinnati is at 39%. So 39% of our children live in poverty. And yes, that's right. There are 3 cities in Ohio. So it's two cities in Ohio, sorry. Sorry? Yeah. So what's the Childhood Poverty Collaborative? About 3 years ago now, Mayor Cranley in his State of the City said, hey, we've got a community problem. It's not a city hall problem, it's not a neighborhood problem, it's a community problem. And he challenged the community to try to move 10,000 families, 5,000 children out of poverty in 5 years. That's a very aggressive goal, but it's also good to have aggressive goals, especially in this area. And that represents really a very small fraction of, the number of families and children in poverty. So what do we mean when we say in poverty? And I think our friends from the United Way or somebody brought these guidelines, which are helpful. So if it's a 3-person household and you live at the poverty level, then you are making essentially $20,000 a year or less. And when you get to the 200% level, which is shown on here, that's getting closer to self-sufficiency. It doesn't mean that you're all the way there, and it doesn't mean that you have a budget that allows you to have luxuries. But above 200% is where you can, generally speaking, afford rent, transportation, food, those kinds of things on a basic level. So we put a marker in the ground and say that for people to be self-sufficient, they need to live at that 250% of the poverty level, and that in our community would be $50,000. Whoa. Yeah. And that's where a lot of people, especially older people, go, well, wait a minute, when I started teaching, I made $6,000 a year. And I thought I was like, rich as could be. So, but fast forward to where we are today. When I started teaching, you could buy a car for $2,000. You could buy gas for well under $1. And you have to kind of calibrate. And so when we say $50,000, the first reaction is, whoa, that seems like a lot of money. But in fact, that's not a made-up number. It's a real number based on the cost of food, shelter, transportation, the basic necessities. And generally, when we're talking about a family of 3, we're talking about 2 children and 1 adult. We're not talking about 2 wage earners. Although there are plenty of 2 wage earners who are also not at that self-sufficiency level. The other thing that has been, of course, very interesting over the course of the last 3 years is the things that we've learned and the kinds of perceptions and misperceptions that people have about people in poverty. When the mayor put out his call to action, in very Cincinnati fashion, a group of business leaders, faith-based leaders, political people, community service people, social service agencies came together and said, well, what can we as a community do about this? And so the Child Poverty Collaborative was born. And the idea is that it's going to take the education system, the employment system, it's going to take employers, it's going to take healthcare, it's going to take housing, it's going to take transportation. That this is really a system. And it's not just one thing. And I'll tell you a story in a minute. But we came together 2 years ago and really spent a year listening to the community. We held over 100 meetings in places like this and said, why do you think we have this poverty rate? What are the barriers for people getting out of poverty? What do people who are in poverty need in order to transform their lives? What's working, what's not working? And it was a really instructive thing to do. Rather than to start with answers, we frankly looked to people in poverty and said to them, help us understand this better. We also had some data, and that's some of what I'm sharing with you today, because that really transformed the way we started thinking about this. And so one of the things that's a very common thing for people to say is, well, if only people would just get a job, only they'd work, right? And the reality is that 62% of children who live in poverty have a parent who is working. And oftentimes they're working at more than one job. And so work brings with it dignity and respect and hopefully opportunity. But it also brings with it a lot of challenges like transportation, childcare. How do you get childcare when you work second shift? People are very excited about Amazon. Amazon is paying $10 to $12 an hour, and that's for second shift, and it's over in Kentucky. So how do you get there? And so there are no silver bullets, which we all kind of know in our gut, because if we knew what that was, we would have done it a long time ago, right? And some things are long-term things, like improving the school system, helping prepare kids for modern day jobs, helping prepare kids not just to go to college, and also to take advantage of especially a lot of the technology jobs, which can in fact pay better than someone who's been to college. But I think debunking the idea that people who are poor are lazy, when we begin to let the public know, especially, and I say this with great respect because I've been an executive at Kroger, I've been a lawyer at a big downtown law firm, and so I've been around the business community a long time. And you know, when I would hear business people say, well, you know, it's just a matter of people getting jobs, I'm like, if only it were just that easy. You know, there's a lot more to it than that. It's also in.
Excuse me, they must know that there's a lot more to it. You said we could break in if we need to. I mean, business people would say.
If only they would get a job.
Kroger starts people at $8.15 an hour.
That's right.
So business, they don't feel any responsibility.
Well, I think that there's a lot of misconceptions, you know, including the fact that, you know, there's the description of the welfare mom, right, who's just out to game the system and who is not at all interested in providing for her family, but just to take what the system has to offer. I think it's also true, and I think it's a hard thing for any community to face, but particularly ours because we're very proud. But there's a lot of racism that holds people back. And there are a lot of other isms. Frankly, women are held back. I mean, one of the things that you look at is, okay, women are working, but what jobs are they working in? Well, they might be working as a home health aide, which is paying about $9 an hour. And that's a typical female profession, especially with a low education. And yet, on $9 an hour, you are not earning enough money to take care of yourself and a family. The truth is that in order to have about that $50,000 level, you need to be more in the $22 to $24 an hour range, which means you need to have skills that business is willing to pay for at that level. So we see ourselves as being a community that's divided by race. And of course by income. And when we look at our kids in the city of Cincinnati, so this is the city only, 40% of those kids that live at that 100% of the federal poverty level, when you move up to the next level, which is, you know, only the 200% of the federal poverty level, so it's not a huge jump. That's 26% of our kids. So if you combine the two, it's in fact even more shocking because it just means that most of the children who live in the city are living below the federal poverty level, living in families that live in poverty. And in fact, if you take that $50,000 number, there are about a third of the people who live in the city who have that much or more in income, or said reverse, 70% do not. And in the county, it's 50-50. So one of the things that you hear people say is it's a city problem. It's not a city problem. And in fact, if you look at the map of where people in poverty live, it goes right up by 75. So it goes right into the suburbs, right into the neighborhoods. And, you know, look, you guys have canvassed probably every neighborhood from, you know, this river to the Cuyahoga County River in your political lives. And you know that there is a broad spectrum of neighborhoods where people live who are just getting by or not getting by. And the last statistic I'll leave you with is, well, why is Cincinnati such an outlier? Because really, for us, population size to have the 6th largest child poverty in the country seems really like it doesn't make sense, right? But we have a very high number of single women who had households. We do have the issue of long-term systemic racism, which holds people back. We have an educational system that serves some very well, but most not as well. And so you're not having upward mobility. And 70%, that's 70% of the jobs in this region pay less than $50,000 a year. So you have a regional economic challenge of not having upward mobility. So what do we do about all this? You know, we shrug our shoulders, do we do more of the same? Because we've been doing a lot for a very long time. Anybody know how much money the United Way raises every year? Well, you're close. Dan guessed 43 million. It's 62 million. It is the fourth or fifth largest United Way in the country. And on a per capita basis, it's the highest. So we have a lot of private money. You know, that's you and me and companies and so on putting money into United Way. Plus we have, of course, the state supports and the federal supports that we have. And so it's not as if there's not enough money in the system. Maybe there is. And there's certainly a whole poverty system, right, of wonderful, good people who are working hard to make a difference, especially in the lives of individual families. But what we came to the conclusion after a year of engaging in the community and engaging people in business and in the faith community and really listening and learning and diving deep into these statistics is that we can't just keep doing the same thing. The business as usual is not working and is not going to work. And so we have decided as a group to take on a couple of things, because that's the other piece. We can't really overpromise here. We need to really underpromise and overdeliver. But there are a lot of people who are waiting for something different than what we have today. And so the collaborative said we're going to focus on 4 key areas. Not because they're the only ones, because they're not. And we have a great group, for example, focusing in the community on people who are returning from prison. You were telling us about the book, about the woman who had been incarcerated. And yes, the Jim Crow book is a really fantastic look at how our mass incarceration policies and practices are really decimating, especially low income and especially communities of people of color. But that's a group over there, and they're doing that, and they're doing great work, and we support it and believe in it. But the collaborative said it wanted to really work on a few areas. The first is legislative. Okay. I mean, we need to make systemic change, and one of the legislative issues is the cliff effect. Anybody know what that is? Okay, so if you're on public benefits, you get those benefits until you earn a certain amount of money, and then those benefits begin to drop off. That makes sense. The problem is that they drop off when you're at 130% of the poverty level, which is, if you look on this chart here, not enough money. So if you're a single mom and you have 2 kids and you're making $10 an hour, $12 an hour, and you get an opportunity to move up, you have to sit and calculate how much losing your child care voucher, losing your housing voucher, losing your transportation voucher, losing your food stamps, all of that will cost you, and will that raise even cover that and help you break even? And the answer is no. And so that's why it's called a cliff effect, because you sort of get to a certain very marginal level and it all falls away. And then you're not only back to where you began, you're probably worse off. And so one of the things that we've been working with the governor, who's been supportive, and members of the legislature, is how do we take this cliff effect? We want people off of benefits, right? There's no dispute about that. But we want them to be able to come off of them gradually and in a way that says, if you have a job, you might keep your SNAP benefits until that job pays X. To take away people's health care, home, transportation, childcare, and food all at once would be devastating to any of us. So legislation around the cliff effect, for example, which isn't easy because of course it costs money, and of course, the question is, well, what's going to be the return on that investment? And the answer is more independence and people getting more upward mobility. But that's an example of legislation. So that's one. Two is working with employers. And I think you asked the question, well, don't employers know that? Reality is a lot of employers, including big employers, including mine at Kroger, who I worked for 18 years, they didn't know how many people were employed by Kroger but were receiving food stamps. They're eligible for food stamps because their wages are so low. Because working at Kroger, the business model is one of part-time and not a full-time job. And it's low wages because it's expected that people will be in and out. So one of the things that we have challenged employers to do is to understand who works for you and how much you pay them and how much that means on this federal poverty level. And we've had some really interesting results from that. And I'll give you one story. So pulling together employers who are interested in learning more about the people who work for them and helping those people advance and understanding how they, as an employer, are making it difficult. So this is an example up in, I guess it's northern, above Cincinnati, like near Dayton, there's a place called Miami Valley Gaming. It's a casino. You don't have to shake your head, it's okay. You can pretend you don't know what it is. But they have a lot of part-time employees. And they have a lot of shifts, right? Because the casino is open 24/7. And so they looked at what was their turnover. How many people were leaving them? And they found out that they had 100% turnover. So Bev comes on and she works, and within 4 months she's gone. And all that money that they've invested in training her and helping her understand her job and so on has really gone out the window. So Miami Valley said, first of all, let's figure out what our cost is of turnover. What does it cost us when you leave? Well, it cost us what it costs to retrain somebody, right? And all that money's gone down the drain. And the woman who's there is really, really smart. And she said, you know what? I can figure out how much that's costing our company. And she came back and said it's costing us $1 million a year. $1 million a year to pay people wages and to not help them solve their life problems, right? The transportation problem, the child care problem, and so on. So she went to management and she said, okay, one of our biggest problems is transportation. What if you give me $200,000 and I run a shuttle service, a van service, that gets people to work, especially for those second and third shifts, but all shifts. If I can save you that money in turnover, isn't that a worthwhile investment? Yeah, it's a net neutral, right? You give me $200,000, I save you $200,000 in turnover, it's a net neutral. They said, sure. It wasn't a net neutral. In fact, they saved $600,000. And they knew then that they were onto something, that helping people solve human needs like transportation and childcare and things like that would reduce turnover, which also gave them a more stable workforce and reduce their turnover cost. And so that's where we're focusing with employers around how can we help you solve your business problems, which right now are recruitment and retention. Right? There's tons and tons and tons of jobs out there. They're just not necessarily ones that pay very much or have any benefits. Bless you. And how can we work together around these human issues so that people can advance? So number one is employment. Number two is that legislative agenda. Yes, sir.
Paul, you pull me up.
Here.
Well, one thing I know is, one thing. Oh, anyway.
You should leave it on.
Okay, I'm okay. Oh, one thing I notice when I drive around our town here is there's always for hire signs at these fast food places. I mean, everywhere. And so I was thinking while you were talking that, you know, a lot of these places are probably franchised. So they're an employer, but the company that owns all them is not doing what you're saying. In other words, they're going to be on a treadmill because they're not really the employer. They're the franchisee or something of 3 stores. But when you think about all of these stores in our area, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, and they're struggling to hire people, right? Because their wages are low, their hours are limited, it's not full-time employment. But you do see them, if you go into a McDonald's, for example, you see them now doing things like tuition reimbursement, giving young people, especially high school people, bonuses and recognition for graduating from high school, which is one of the most important things you can do. So you see even those employers beginning to find ways to change the dynamic. Now, I'm surprised I haven't heard this yet, especially from a Democratic group, but part of the answer is clearly to pay more, right? It's for people to have more money in their pockets.
We're also very polite.
And no, you don't have to be polite with me, that's for sure. Yes, sir.
Employers, transportation, said the employer's transportation idea saves $600,000 for the employer.
Right.
What happened to the people who actually work?
Well, what happened for the people is that they then had a stable way to get to work. So they were more able to be at work and earn money, and the longer they were there, the more they built up skills, and the more they were able to then have some upward mobility. So it's a benefit all the way around. It's not, I mean, anything that's just an employer benefit, it'd be hard not to find there to be a benefit for the employee as well. But in that case, they measured both. And having a stable job, not moving from job to job, is really important, particularly with very low income people who have very little stability in their life. Yes, sir.
So it seems to me that if that move to create a shuttle saved them $600,000 out of $1 million expenses, that's a 60% of
ROI, yeah.
of what was creating the problem for them was transportation. Did they then tackle some of the other things like childcare?
Yes.
And have they some sort of metric for what that turned out, what percentage that turned out?
They're not there yet in terms of what the measurement is, but they know that they want to move on to the next thing. I mean, people's lives are complicated. Think of your own life, especially when you were young and you were raising kids and you were trying to work and one of your kids got sick and hello. There we go. I mean, it's complicated, so you're right. You can't just do one thing. You have to begin to do multiple things. And really progressive employers are trying to figure out how do they do multiple things.
And does transportation appear to be, is that modelable? Is 60%?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think they know the answer. It's early. I will tell you though that your question is the right one because transportation is one of those key factors. And so one of the things, for example, that we're looking at is how do you help people get low cost but reliable cars? Because we love to say, oh, let's just put everybody on public transit, but Cincinnati has one of the worst transportation systems, especially for people who have to work second shift. And that's where a lot of the good jobs are. So transportation's a big piece of it.
But another thing employers can do is they can provide bus pass, metro passes.
There's a lot of things, and a lot of employers are trying because, again, it's a great competition when you need to be competitive to hire people. That people become very innovative. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if a lot of you know, but our library system right here in Cincinnati, Hamlin County, provides food for kids during the summer. My niece works at one, and she would have, the parents would drop little 4-year-olds off, and there they would be for the day. So I think it indicates the poverty problem in Cincinnati and Hamlin County. based on the United States.
Well, and you have to, in some ways,
I'm gonna stop
you know-
questions, she needs to get through her presentation.
no, I think I'm just about finished, but it's fine. My point is that there's a lot of work going on. There's a lot of really good people involved. You're welcome to follow our work. It's the childpovertycollaborative.org. We are funded, yes, through the United Way, but also through private funding. And it's been, to me, really very gratifying to see a lot of businesses say, yes, I'll provide startup funding, yes, we'll provide ongoing support. Because this is a community problem and a community issue, and it's going to take exactly that kind of creativity of the library saying, wait a minute, we've got all these kids in here all summer long, how can we help feed them? Because they're hungry. They're hungry. So, you know, the ability, no thank you. Okay. I understand. Oh, get out. All right. I'm more than happy to take questions. It's much more fun to do that.
I think, excuse me, I've got the microphone.
She's got the mic.
One of the things that really upsets me is gentrification without, I mean, what the prices of housing, renting. If you can't, you can do all these things for people, but if they can't live in a decent place, what are they going to do?
Yeah, and that's a very well put question. And the reality is that we're about 40,000 housing units short in this community. 40,000 housing units. And the result of that is that people live, especially immigrants and people who are undocumented, live in horrible housing conditions. I mean, really like old-fashioned tenements.
I talked to 35 years, and you know, what I've seen is just depressing.
Yeah.
People angry at the poor, they're
Yep.
taking my money,
Yep.
theoretically. The taxes, if we could tax corporations and the wealthy, we have more money to spend. And they're not paying their fair share, so you can hear them really angry.
Well, I think, Ann, your anger is part of what motivated a lot of people to come together. And we had 2 community summits where we had, at the first summit we had 500 people, and the second summit we had almost 800 people. And people were angry. And we talk about the poverty system, but we don't talk about the privilege system, about the opportunities that people have that they're not even aware of. And so your anger is absolutely justified. And I think I like the mayor for many reasons, and one of them is that he is willing to take on tough things, and this is a tough thing. You know, you could very easily, and many mayors do it, just sort of say, well, we've got great social services, we've got a big United Way, you know, all is well. Well, all is really not so well. Yes, ma'am.
I just don't hear what your last 2 points are.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
the last 2 points.
All right, quick, I'll get that done, sorry. So we've got business, we've got the legislative part. I'm glad you're keeping me on track, that's really helpful. The third is social services. Okay, we have a huge social service network, lots of organizations doing very good work, but they're not well coordinated. And so for a person who needs a lot of things, like housing, transportation, and medical care, and so on, it's a little like you have to go from place to place to place to place. And this is what people told us, is if I were going to access all the benefits that there were, I couldn't work. I'd need to be able to do that full time. And as somebody who just enrolled in Medicare, you know, it's a bewildering system out there, right? And I've got 3 college degrees. And so think about tagging along 2 kids, getting on a bus, going to the housing office, then trying to go to the free store to get food, you know, and meanwhile, you can't even get there from here. So, yes. So we have pulled together, and they volunteered, 25 human service agencies, the biggest and the best in the community, and also some very small ones. And one of the things they've agreed to do is to have shared measurements among them. And that sounds like, what? okay, that's bureaucratic nonsense. It's not. Because I don't know how good your program is because you give me your statistics, but they're in your format and they measure what you want them to measure. And so what these agencies have agreed is they're going to share with each other information and best practices, and they're also going to share what I call best failures. And they're going to be more open with each other and more transparent and have fewer silos for people. And best failures are sometimes the best learnings, right? And this is kind of unheard of because just like every other business, human services are competitive. They're competitive for resources, they're competitive for reputation, they're competitive for funders, and they have said, we know we can do better. We know we have to do better. And so we're very excited about what we're calling one-to-one, and the idea is that what each human being needs in life, and we all have had one, is a mentor or a coach, right? Someone who can help you problem solve. Not problem solve for you, but help you learn how to problem solve, get through whatever it is. And we've all had them. We've all been fortunate to have family members or bosses or whatever. So and then the last one is the United Way. And they have committed, so the United Way has, as I say, $62 million this year. And for years, they've kind of funded the same things, and it's all good stuff. Nobody's saying it's not good stuff. But somehow we haven't moved the needle on poverty. And that, they have put a bold stake in the ground and said, our mission is to get families out of poverty. And so they are committed to shifting their funding, shifting their focus, and also shifting what they measure, again, which is so important if we're really going to learn from each other and really do a better job. And so those are the kind of key things. If you think about it in like a hierarchy, you've got the individual need at the top, which is the one-to-one and the human services working with families on improving delivery of service. You've got the employers, which is the system. You've got the legislative, which is a broader system. And you've got the United Way funding. So you've got those pieces. And I will give you a leave behind, which I think you will enjoy. It shows you what our commitments are in the form of kind of a hierarchy. Because frankly, if you don't get the system things right, it's wonderful what you do for a family, but nothing's going to change, right? So that's the Child Poverty Collaborative. That's what we've been up to. You're welcome to help in any way you'd like, and probably you already are. People say, well, what can I do to help? Well, if you're tutoring, or you're at the library, or you're whatever you're doing, that human interaction, that touch, and that making those services better makes a difference. But it's going to take all of us saying, I own this problem. This is a community problem. It's not a business community problem. It's not the mayor's problem. It belongs to all of us. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any attempt to either learn from or build upon the war on poverty stuff that came out in the 60s? Are you thinking about that?
Sure.
And the failures there and the
Sure.
successes there? And
Sure.
how
Well,
that
it's
works?
interesting because some of the people who are engaged today, of course, were there then. There's a lot of learnings from that, and most of them aren't very good. Most of the money from the war on poverty went to fund agencies, social service, systems, delivery, and never got to people. And when you talk to, especially some people who have been in the field for a long time, like Reverend Lynch II, so Daddy Lynch, and I don't know if you know Aaron Greenlee, that lives in this neighborhood. I mean, these are people who have been through this many, many cycles, and so, here comes Lynn and the Child Poverty saying, well, let's take on poverty, and they're like, really? Really? We've done this. Yeah, I thought we did this. And the only people who got rich were, not the people in poverty. So there are things to learn, Peggy, and we do. I don't think anybody believes that we have a perfectly clean slate to start from. I think everybody knows we got to build on what we have, but we also can't just keep doing what we're doing because it's that old definition of insanity, but all we have to do is look at it and say it's not working. So what do we have to do differently?
The voice of a 30-year Head Start employee.
There you go.
And we thought we were doing all these wonderful
You got
things,
it.
and now people are going, well, phooey on that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I don't think it's phooey on Head Start. It's really, it's an important thing. I think the thing that we learned from Head Start was it wasn't enough. That it gets the little ones started, but if you then go into a very mediocre school system that doesn't pick up on kids and accelerate them from there, well, that ends up being lost. Thank you all.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
I stole the mic over here.
Ah.
So I have kind of a two-part question. One, why is the poverty line so far below what you actually need to live on? And two, do you, as an organization, or have you seen a breakdown of what you're missing at the poverty line, and what are all those things between 100% and 250% of the poverty line that you don't have? Because I think talking to people who have an inherent, well, if you're above the poverty line, you should be okay mentality, having the story about what's the difference between the poverty line and 250% of the poverty line would be very valuable.
I think that's a great question. And it is numbers and it is statistics, and it's a very arbitrary number. I mean, it hasn't necessarily been adjusted in a very long time, but you've got to start somewhere, and you have to have something that's common across the country. The story that is one of my favorites comes from, and not because it's a happy story at all, but comes from Pastor Tate, who's in Avondale, and he said he had a parishioner call him and say, Pastor, can you help me with my car payment? And so without asking too many questions, right? Said, yes, sure. And then the person called back and said, well, could you help me with, and then kind of stopped and said, well, really what's happened is I sold my car to get food for my family because I lost my home, and in trying to find a new home, I lost my job. That's where 100%, 200% doesn't really matter. When your whole world is that fragile and it all comes crashing down, it takes the approach of I'm going to holistically wrap services around this person. I'm not going to cut them off, because that's part of the issue, is that whole cutoff, that quick cutoff. You get to a line, I mean, basically like this tile, you step over that line, everything else is gone. Your food's gone, your medical's gone, your transportation's gone. So you're exactly right. Those numbers are just arbitrary numbers. And I think what we're trying to do in the one-to-one, the human service side, is to recognize that we need to stay with people until they really become stable and they've handled some crises and they've handled some of what happens in life, right? I mean, nobody's saying that shouldn't happen. Life happens. It happens to all of us. But not if you don't have a support network that helps you deal with it. So thank you very much. I'm afraid I'm out of time. But I want to leave these for you so that you're welcome to them. And there'll be more there. And I ask you to join us online.
Thank you so much for being here. Again, guys, you've been a wonderful, wonderful audience. You have great questions, and I know your involvement is there. My heart goes out to these people who don't have 250% of the poverty line. I just want to mention that these little cards were given to me by somebody from the United Way, and I got them for you for today, so you have the actual numbers. Next week we have Lakshmi Samarko, who is the Hamilton County Coroner. She's an amazing speaker. If you have not heard her speak, you need to be here next week. She is amazing, and there are amazing things, good and bad, happening with the coroner's office, and you need to hear about those.
Why don't we continue talking? Can we?
Just a couple of announcements. We need As people are leaving, we make sure you take the food. The food must go. And there's a lot of it today. Please make sure that we have the leftovers. I just want to say hello special to Sid and Deb. Sid is our youngest Democrat there. How old is he now, Deb? 17 months. Hello. Yay, to our youngest Democrat. And thank you for Deb for bringing him. Because that's our future, folks. Come on back if you want to talk about this. Pick out some people at a table and continue to explore what you need to in order to make yourself happy with this stuff. I hope you enjoyed the cake. Happy birthday, Katie. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Robert, for doing the video.
Good, how about you? Is the marketplace
I don't know, I mean, yeah, they do, but they do have to educate the money into the city.